The United States is projected to collapse by 2033. And if and when it does, staying there could cost you literally everything. If you're an investor, an expat, or a remote worker hoping things are still gonna turn around, this video is your wake-up call. In it, I will break down why 2033 is the deadline and where it would be smartest for you to consider moving to before it happens. Look, I see a lot of resilience in the US economy as it sits right now. Despite all the crazy policy shifts and tariffs on, tariffs off, trade wars with China, tax policy, and the version that the House passed that actually increases the deficit by trillions, at least it seems like it will, all of that still has not proven that the US economy can't withstand it. In fact, all of the indicators seem to be going in the right direction. Jobs, CPI, inflation rate, growth of the economy going into the second quarter, what's projected, all of that. And by this Friday, we'll know exactly what the jobs report says to see if there's maintained strength. But I remember a conversation I had with a CIA spy a few years ago on a podcast I hosted at the time called Tribe of Millionaires. And he shared some real truths about China that still exist to this day, I believe. Check this out.
What is the assessment you're making that China takes over as a world power by 2033? Which, by the way, puts you in the EU, does it not?
Correct.
Go for it.
Correct. So it's about economics. The three big things that people have to understand with China, right? The first is that China is not the United States.
Right.
They don't play the same game the same way, not even close. So when you think about the United States and you project anything about how we execute superpower, dumb, military might, economic might, if you project that onto China, you're wrong. That's not how they work, right? So that's the first thing to keep in mind about China. The second thing to keep in mind about China is that China has no human rights.
Yeah.
The United States has human rights. China has no human rights. So just imagine how much of an advantage it is to executing quickly and at scale when you don't have any kind of responsibility for human rights. And then the third thing to keep in mind is that the whole world right now, outside of the United States and China, the whole world is choosing sides. We're back to pre-World War II. Are people going to align themselves with the United States long term, or are people going to align themselves with China long term? And at the root of that question is the question of ideology. Because guess what? We like to blame China for being communist. We like to hate on China for being communist and backwoods and whatever else. But China, as they represent themselves to the rest of the world, they don't stand on an ideology. What they stand on is pragmatism. We won't tell you how to dictate your country. We won't hold you accountable for your human rights. We won't hold you accountable for your corruption. If you want to trade with us, we'll trade with you. What does the United States do? No, folks, sorry. You have to be a democracy. You have to have free and fair elections, right? We force our ideology on everybody else. So the whole world is coming to this point now where they have to decide, do we want to bunkmate with a country that's going to force an ideology on us? After we've seen how that ideology has failed multiple other countries, right? Failed in Afghanistan, failed in Vietnam, failed in Iraq, failed in Korea. How many times do we have to see this happen? Versus China, who's offering an alternative in the marketplace, if you will.
Sure.
Saying, you just do what's good for you, and if what you do is also good for us, we're going to make good bedfellows, right? So those are the three main things we have to keep in mind when you're considering the United States versus China. The reason I believe that China is on the trajectory to become the economic superpower by 2033 is partly because economic analysts are saying the same thing. Their original projection was 2035. COVID actually accelerated.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Expedited.
That's
the word. Yeah.
COVID actually expedited it. Not even though COVID started in China, it expedited the process because China became this high-tech manufacturer of electric vehicles. So in 2023, China has already outpaced Tesla as the top EV generator for the world. And that's a huge marketplace. That's an experimental marketplace, all the green energy vehicles. So you're seeing multiple instances where China is growing economically. The BRICS is an example. They're bringing more people into the BRICS than ever before. They're bringing American allies into the BRICS. So that's expanding their trading group. You also see them expanding their geopolitical influence with countries like China and Iran and North Korea. Right now, these are, compared to the United States, those are poor countries. But compared to other countries, they're not that poor, right?
Yeah.
So what you see is this acceleration of the Chinese economy and this deceleration of the U.S. economy. right? On the US side, we're printing money, we're regulating everything, we're forcing a narrative about environmentalism. I'm all for saving the environment.
Sure.
But is it worth it to save the environment if it costs you your position as the top superpower in the world? That's where it becomes a harder question for me, right? So as we shrink and over-regulate and limit our economic growth, you see countries like China accelerating and expediting their economic growth. So economic analysts have already shortened their estimates from 2035 to 2033. And even like the best counter argument from other economists out there is that it won't be a clear winner by 2032, 2033. It'll be near exact parity.
There's a few key variables that still are on my mind that I actually talked to the CIA spy about. One of those is population decline in China. And where he shifted my mind was around the idea that population decline in China actually eliminates a lot of those that are more reliant on government assistance, the elderly class, as population declines there, which they are projected to have a major population decline in the next few decades, I should say. But that actually is to the advantage of China. They become more nimble, they have more of a working class population, and so on. Not something I assume, but that's what he had said. I said at the beginning of this video that the US economy has been way more resilient than many of us maybe thought it could be, despite all the craziness and the tariffs and everything else. But you got to admit that China also has resilience built into their economy. And they have the ability to go out, as he said in that video, find trade partners, do deals with other places without projecting any sort of, governmental way of being, without projecting their values on another country that they do business with. I see it where I live here in the Dominican Republic. China has inroads here. The US has much bigger, but China does have inroads here. And so what to do next is really interesting. I went through and looked at what are the best countries potentially to move to, and a lot of them pop up, like Panama, Portugal, Costa Rica is a great one, and there's many others. Dubai, but it's very expensive there. But I moved to the Dominican Republic. I moved here in 2022 with my wife, my 2 boys, and my 2 dogs. You may hear one of them bark in the background. And what I found here is culturally an incredible place that's impermeable. Some people believe that, oh my God, if too many people move there, they lose their culture. I don't believe that's possible. In fact, I think people that move here really find themselves integrating into the culture more than trying to do something differently with it. The culture's really strong. Connected people, people that want to do things together. It's a really amazing place with an amazing spirit. Conservative Christian values is probably the best way that I could put it. So the culture's incredible. The weather, it's beautiful. Despite hurricane season, people fear that. These places are all made out of concrete. Those walls are concrete. There's nothing on them. It's just painted concrete, tile floor. So windows could blow out, but in the right places, the places you would move, you shouldn't have any issues with hurricanes. Definitely impacts people on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. But thankfully, there's a lot of people that help when those things happen. I've lived through one of those so far, living down here. But the bigger thing from an economic standpoint might be the not only affordability. Now look, it's not cheap here, but it's more affordable than what you might get if you were to buy in, say, Florida or somewhere else with a similar climate, or even other countries around here, like Jamaica is way more expensive than the Dominican Republic, even though they have a less GDP per capita. But definitely you can get value for the money around the country. In Punta Cana, where I live in particular, there's a ton of development and there's a ton of opportunity there. You got to buy right, but it's there and it's at a reasonable cost when comparing it with the US or Canada. But in addition, there are some interesting tax structures here, like Confotor, which allows you to waive 15 years of property tax if you buy a Confotor approved property. So you have tax advantages, you have a stable political environment, you have the growing economy, the fastest growing in all of Latin America. This country is hosting the Summit of the Americas at the end of this year, which is all of the Western countries coming in here, the United States, Canada, all of them, coming to Punta Cana for a once every 3-year summit that is going to, once every 3 or 4 year summit, that is absolutely going to continue to put Dominican Republic on the map. In addition, there are so many nearshoring things opening up here that there's opportunity as the United States wants to fight with China and some companies moving their manufacturing from China here, which might fly in the face of the economic parity that we're projected to have with China in 2033. But again, China's a resilient economy. They're going to find other ways. But the point is there is a shift to nearshoring because we're so close to the United States border. We're so close to Miami. So there's a lot of reasons why the Dominican Republic should be looked at as an absolute powerhouse place for people like you to move to if they're looking at what's happening in the United States now and don't like it, or if they're like, I like what's happening now, but I still fear for the future. What if we're not the reserve currency of the world anymore? What if, this tariff policy and trade war, what if we lose it? What if China gets inroads with more and more countries? What if BRICS becomes a bigger deal around the world, this other currency other than the US dollar? Already US dollar reserves are being reduced in central banks around the world. There's a lot of reason to consider whether or not you want to live for the rest of your life in the United States. Still the greatest country right now, but there's significant risk in the future, and we've staked a place here in the Dominican Republic, not because of it, that's not why we moved, but since we've moved, we've realized the advantage of being here. That's my thought, that's my take. What say you? Drop it down below in the comments, let me know, and check out this video, which is going to really help you consider whether or not this is the right place for you, and I hope to see you on the next one.